Maplewood was the kind of small Indiana town where everyone recognized the sound of each other's cars and where neighbors still waved from their porches as dusk settled in. Rachel Miller, 30 years old, often told herself that this little town would give her daughter the childhood she never had safe and ordinary. Rachel worked as an accountant at a local firm, and though the pay was modest, the hours had always been manageable until the company landed a big client and overtime became unavoidable. She reminded herself again and again that the extra money was necessary, that it was only temporary, that Lily would understand one day why her mother sometimes slipped out in the evening with a travel mug of coffee and weary determination. Lily Miller was 9 years old, tall for her age, with long chestnut hair that always fell in tangles, no matter how carefully Rachel brushed it each morning before school. She was sensitive and imaginative, a child who loved drawing pictures of horses and reading fairy tales under the covers with a flashlight when she thought no one was watching. Since the divorce, Lily had clung to her mother with even more intensity. She often asked if Rachel would be home by bedtime, if she would read a chapter of their favorite story, and Rachel's heart broke a little each time she had to say she would be working late. On one particular Tuesday in October, the wind carried the smell of leaves and chimney smoke through the neighborhood. Rachel left for work just after dinner, hugging Lily tightly before handing her over to the care of her mother, Patricia. She kissed Lily on the forehead and whispered that she loved her not noticing the stiffness in the child's shoulders or the way her daughter's eyes flickered with something like unease when Patricia entered the room. Rachel walked briskly down the sidewalk, clutching her purse, unaware that the night ahead would mark the beginning of a nightmare she had never imagined. Across the street lived Linda Carter, 50 years old, a retired nurse who had spent decades in the pediatric ward of a hospital in Indianapolis before moving to Maplewood for peace and quiet. She lived alone with her cat read mystery novels and kept her garden neat, even in autumn when most neighbors had already given up on fallen leaves. Linda often glanced toward the Miller house at night, a habit formed out of gentle curiosity. She had noticed that Rachel left for work several evenings a week and that Patricia's car was always in the driveway soon after. That night around 10:30, Linda settled into her recliner with a book and a cup of tea. The town was quiet, except for the rustle of dry branches outside. She had almost drifted to sleep when a sharp sound carried through the open window. At first, she thought it was the television from a distant house, but then it came again, clearer and unmistakably close. A child's voice, shrill and filled with fear, pierced the darkness. "Don't hit me!" Linda froze. The words shot through her like electricity. She turned off her lamp heart pounding and listened again. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then she heard muffled crying, the kind that twisted in her gut and stirred memories of young patients she had once comforted in hospital rooms. Linda rose, walked quietly to her front door, and stepped onto the porch. The Miller house stood across the street, its upstairs window faintly glowing. Another small cry reached her ears, followed by what sounded like a woman's harsh voice, low and cutting though Linda could not make out the exact words. Her instincts as a nurse told her something was terribly wrong, yet hesitation gripped her. Should she march across the street and knock on the door? Should she call the police right away? What if she was mistaken? She remained rooted on her porch, trembling, torn between action and fear of misjudgment. Eventually, the sounds died down, replaced once again by the stillness of Maplewood's night. Linda stayed awake long after midnight ears, straining for more evidence, but the house across the street remained dark and silent. Around midnight, Rachel returned home from work, exhausted and clutching her jacket against the chill. She noticed no lights on in the neighborhood, no sign of the disturbance Linda had witnessed. Unlocking the front door, Rachel entered the quiet house. Patricia's bedroom door was closed, the hallway dark. She moved to Lily's room and opened the door gently. Her daughter lay curled on the bed, clutching her worn, stuffed rabbit eyes, swollen and red as though from crying. When Rachel leaned over to kiss her, Lily whispered nothing, only buried her face deeper into the pillow. Rachel's heart clenched. She brushed back a strand of Lily's hair and whispered, "Mommy's home now." Lily nodded faintly, but said nothing more. Rachel assumed her daughter had been upset about bedtime without her, that perhaps she had cried herself to sleep from missing her mother. She tucked the blanket around Lily, kissed her again, and slipped into her own room. Never realizing that just hours earlier, her neighbor across the street had heard something that would change both their lives, Rachel Miller had never known what it meant to grow up in a nurturing family. From her earliest memories, her mother, Patricia, dominated the household with sharp words and an iron will. Patricia, now 55, had spent her life convinced that control equaled love. But for Rachel, that control had meant constant criticism and a childhood shaped by fear. If Rachel brought home a report card with all A's except one, B, Patricia's response was not pride, but an icy remark about failure. If Rachel tried to express sadness after her father walked out when she was 12, Patricia told her to toughen up, that only weak girls cried. Rachel learned to hide her emotions and to avoid confrontation, but the scars never left. By the time she turned 18, she longed to escape, so she worked 2 jobs and paid her way through community college later, finding stability in her career as an accountant. She thought that independence and the chance to build her own home would heal the wounds, but Patricia always lingered in the background, calling frequently, criticizing her clothes, her job, her relationships. When Rachel married Michael, Patricia told her flatly that he was not good enough. When the marriage crumbled years later and Rachel was left raising Lily alone, Patricia's voice was the loudest again, reminding her daughter of every supposed mistake. After the divorce, Rachel vowed to raise Lily differently to give her safety and warmth. Yet circumstances forced her to open the door once more to the very influence she feared. Patricia offered to help after Michael left. She said it was only natural that a grandmother step in, that Lily needed guidance and discipline, and Rachel, exhausted from balancing work and single motherhood, accepted. At first, Rachel convinced herself it would be temporary, a matter of a few weeks, until she found a babysitter for evenings. Patricia moved into the spare bedroom with her neatly folded dresses and her air of authority settling into the house as if it were her own. Soon, her presence filled every corner. She cooked meals and reorganized cupboards without asking, corrected Lily's manners in a tone that sounded less like teaching and more like command, and began inserting herself into decisions Rachel had thought belonged to her alone. When Rachel said Lily could stay up on Friday nights to watch a movie, Patricia scolded both mother and child, insisting that rules were rules. When Lily asked to go to a birthday party, Patricia whispered that the other children were spoiled and not worth her time. It was not just discipline, but indoctrination. More than once, Rachel overheard Patricia saying to Lily, "Your mother is too soft. She cannot raise you into a strong woman. You must learn from me if you want to survive." At first, Rachel dismissed it as the harsh language she had grown up with, telling herself that Lily would brush it off. But slowly, she noticed changes. Lily, who once raced into her arms after school, began to hesitate, glancing back toward Patricia as if seeking permission. At bedtime, Lily sometimes resisted hugs, stiff and quiet, muttering that she was tired. Rachel felt a pang of unease, yet tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was the divorce taking its toll. Perhaps Lily was just adjusting. Deep inside, Rachel recognized the old familiar voice of her childhood, the same tone Patricia had used to convince her she was inadequate. Now it was being directed at Lily, and the realization churned Rachel's stomach with dread. Rachel's younger brother Mark only confirmed her fears about their mother. Mark had struggled with gambling for years, and whenever he was in trouble, Patricia bailed him out, lecturing Rachel that loyalty to family meant sacrifice. Mark sometimes showed up at Rachel's doorstep asking for money, his excuses a blur of overdue rent and debt collectors. Patricia always defended him, calling him her poor boy, and criticized Rachel for refusing to hand over cash. It reinforced the pattern Rachel knew too well: her mother valued control over fairness, favoritism over truth. Yet Rachel tolerated Patricia's presence in her home because she needed the help. With overtime at work, she believed leaving Lily with her grandmother was safer than leaving her with a stranger. She pushed down her doubts, telling herself that whatever discomfort she felt was her own baggage, not something Lily would suffer. But late at night, lying awake in her room, she sometimes heard Patricia's muffled voice through the walls and Lily's faint responses. She told herself it was bedtime stories or conversations about school, but unease kept her from sleeping. She knew her mother's patterns. She knew how Patricia could twist words until reality blurred. Rachel carried guilt with her each morning as she left for work. Lily would cling to her eyes wide, and Rachel would whisper promises that she would be back soon. Yet beneath her confident smile, she feared that history was repeating itself. Patricia's control was once again expanding, and the person most vulnerable was the child Rachel loved more than anything. She had sworn never to let her daughter endure the same emotional blows she had known. Yet with every week that passed, Rachel felt more like she had delivered Lily straight into the very storm she had tried to escape. Rachel tried to convince herself that the growing unease in her chest was nothing more than paranoia, a leftover scar from her own childhood, but the warning signs surrounding Lily were becoming too obvious to ignore. At school, Lily's once lively spirit dimmed. Her teacher, Ms. Turner, a woman in her 40s known for her warmth and patience, called Rachel in after class one afternoon. She explained that Lily had stopped volunteering answers, no longer raised her hand, and instead sat silently with her eyes fixed on her desk. When classmates invited her to join a game of tag, she declined and retreated to the swings by herself. Miss Turner leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm, and suggested that Rachel pay close attention to what might be happening at home. Rachel thanked her, though embarrassment burned in her cheeks. She wanted to believe her daughter was simply adjusting to the divorce, but deep inside, a gnawing dread pressed against her ribs. The signs at home were just as troubling. Rachel came home one evening to find Lily's sleeves pulled down, even though the weather was warm. When she asked why, Lily mumbled something about being cold and quickly changed the subject. Later that night, when Rachel helped her change into pajamas, she noticed faint bruises on her forearm. Her heart dropped. She pressed Lily gently, asking where the marks had come from. Lily shrugged, whispering that she had tripped on the playground. Before Rachel could ask more, Patricia entered the room with folded laundry and cut the conversation short, explaining casually that children fell all the time. The look Patricia gave her daughter, however, was sharp and silencing. Rachel remembered that look from her own youth, a warning to keep quiet or face worse consequences. Another evening, Rachel came home earlier than expected. The house was strangely quiet. She walked down the hallway and paused outside Lily's room. Through the slightly open door, she saw her daughter standing, rigid tears streaming down her face, while Patricia loomed over her with a raised hand. Though Patricia lowered it before Rachel entered, Lily's instinctive flinch spoke volumes. Patricia turned with a smile and said she was merely correcting Lily's behavior, that the girl had been disrespectful. Rachel's throat tightened as old memories of her own childhood punishments rose up. She wanted to protest, but fear of escalation kept her silent. She told herself again that it was temporary, that she needed the help until her workload lightened, yet guilt gnawed at her every time Lily avoided eye contact or stiffened when Patricia walked into the room. The little girl who used to chatter about books and dreams of becoming an artist now offered short answers, often hiding behind a stuffed animal. Rachel noticed Lily grew hesitant even around her, as if unsure whom she could trust. When bedtime came, Lily sometimes asked if her mother would be home that night, a question that made Rachel's heart ache. She wanted to say yes every time, but the reality of bills and overtime pulled her away. Each goodbye felt heavier. At work, Rachel struggled to concentrate, distracted by images of Lily's downcast eyes. She found herself rereading the same spreadsheet rows over and over, unable to focus. Her coworkers noticed her fatigue, offering sympathy, but she brushed it off, unwilling to expose the chaos inside her home. Yet the image of Lily recoiling from Patricia haunted her. The final straw came on a Saturday morning when Rachel noticed a faint scratch near Lily's hairline. When she asked about it, Patricia interrupted with a dismissive laugh, claiming Lily had fallen out of bed. Lily nodded quickly, her lips pressed together. Rachel bent to kiss her daughter's forehead, feeling the child's tiny body tense under her touch. That moment crystallized every fear she had tried to bury. The echoes of her own childhood merged with the reality before her, and she knew the cycle of intimidation had not ended with her. It had reached her daughter. Rachel stood in the kitchen later that day, staring out the window, wondering how much longer she could pretend things were normal. Her heart told her the bruises and fear were not coincidences. Lily's silence screamed louder than words. Rachel realized she could not ignore the truth any longer. Rachel's doubts reached a breaking point when Linda Carter finally knocked on her door one crisp Thursday evening. Rachel had just come home from work, her shoulders heavy from hours of balancing ledgers, and she was still setting down her purse when she opened the door to find her neighbor standing there with an expression of deep concern. Linda's gray hair was pulled back in a bun, and in her hands she clutched a steaming mug she had forgotten to leave behind in her own kitchen, a sign of how urgent her visit was. Rachel invited her inside, heart suddenly thumping, and asked what was wrong. Linda hesitated as though unsure if she should share what she had been keeping to herself, then took a deep breath. She explained that on more than one night she had been startled awake by cries drifting from Rachel's house. Not soft whimpers or nightmares, but screams of a child in terror. She leaned closer and repeated the words she had heard with her own ears. "Don't hit me!" Rachel froze the air, leaving her chest in a rush. Linda went on describing how the cries came almost at the same time each night around 10 or 11, and how she sometimes also heard a woman's voice raised in anger. At first, Linda had tried to convince herself it was the television or a bad dream, but the tone of those cries, the raw fear, was unmistakable to a nurse who had spent her life caring for children. Rachel's face drained of color as she shook her head, stammering that it must have been a mistake that her daughter never mentioned such things. But Linda placed a hand on her arm and said firmly, "I know the sound of a child in pain. This is not a misunderstanding. Something is happening when you are not home." Rachel's mind reeled, torn between disbelief and a sick certainty she had been trying to suppress. She thought of the bruises, the flinches, the silence. She remembered the scratch on Lily's forehead and the way her daughter pulled away when she reached to hug her. A lump formed in her throat. She whispered that her mother Patricia stayed with Lily most evenings, and Linda's eyes narrowed with worry. Rachel's voice cracked as she asked if Linda thought Patricia could be responsible. Linda did not answer directly, but reminded her that sometimes those closest to us are capable of things we cannot imagine. She urged Rachel to trust her instincts and not dismiss what she already suspected. Rachel's hands shook as she poured them both coffee. She confessed that she had seen signs but had been too afraid to believe. Linda nodded sympathetically but insisted that ignoring the signs would only make things worse. She explained how in her career she had seen children suffer long-term trauma because adults failed to act quickly. Her words cut into Rachel like a blade of truth. That night, after Linda left, Rachel paced the living room in silence, clutching her phone torn between calling the police immediately or confronting Patricia herself. Fear of losing control of the situation stopped her. She did not want to risk a false step that would drive her daughter further into silence. She decided instead to observe more closely to look for undeniable proof. As she stood at the window watching Linda's light turn off across the street, Rachel realized her neighbor had just handed her the confirmation she needed. The bruises, the silence, the screams Linda had heard, they all pointed in the same direction. Rachel felt sick with guilt, ashamed that it had taken an outsider to make her confront what was happening in her own home. She crept quietly into Lily's room to check on her daughter. The girl was already asleep, her face peaceful under the glow of a nightlight, but Rachel noticed faint tear stains on her cheeks. She knelt by the bed, brushed Lily's hair from her forehead, and whispered a promise that she would protect her even if she did not yet know how. The words barely left her lips before a wave of determination began to replace her fear. Linda's warning had not only confirmed Rachel's suspicions, it had lit a spark of resolve. She knew she could not remain passive any longer. Rachel woke the next morning with a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. Yet, under the weight of dread, there was also a thread of determination. She had to know the truth beyond doubt. She could no longer cling to excuses or hope the problem would vanish if ignored. On her way to work, she stopped at a small electronics store on the edge of town and bought a nanny cam disguised as an air freshener. Her hands trembled as she carried the box to the car, thinking of how far she had fallen to even consider spying in her own home. But the image of Lily's bruised arms and Linda's urgent eyes pushed her forward. That evening, while Patricia cooked dinner in the kitchen, Rachel quietly set up the device in Lily's bedroom, angling it toward the bed and desk where her daughter often sat. She told herself that if nothing happened, she would feel foolish but relieved. Yet deep down, she feared the footage would confirm her worst nightmares. Over the next 2 nights, Rachel forced herself to act normal, leaving for overtime shifts while her stomach twisted with anxiety. She wanted to run back through the door and snatch her daughter away, but she knew she needed proof if she wanted the police and CPS to take her seriously. She barely slept, staring at the ceiling in her office break room and counting the hours until she could return home. On the third night, she retrieved the device and locked herself in her bedroom while Patricia slept down the hall. With trembling fingers, she played the first recording. At first, there was only silence. Lily reading quietly at her desk, Patricia entering the room with a plate of cookies. Rachel nearly let herself relax until the older woman's tone shifted. The camera captured Patricia's hand striking the desk as she scolded Lily for spilling a crumb, her voice low but sharp like a whip. Lily flinched visibly, shrinking into her chair. The second clip was worse. Patricia stood over Lily, forcing her to kneel on the carpet, repeating over and over that Rachel was weak and unfit as a mother. "Your mom is useless," she hissed. "If you want to grow strong, you listen to me. If you ever tell her about this, you will regret it." Rachel covered her mouth, tears spilling down her face as she heard Lily's small voice beg to go to bed. The final clip shattered what little denial she had left. Patricia slapped Lily across the cheek, not hard enough to leave more than a red mark, but the sound echoed in the quiet room. Rachel recoiled from the screen, nausea rising her body, shaking with rage and horror. She whispered apologies to her sleeping child in the next room, guilt crashing down on her that she had left Lily alone with the very person she should have protected her from. For hours, Rachel sat on the floor replaying the clips torn between heartbreak and fury. She thought of her own childhood of nights when Patricia's words had cut her down until she doubted her own worth. Now the cycle had ensnared Lily. Rachel wanted to storm into her mother's room and throw her out that instant, but she knew confrontation without preparation would put her daughter at greater risk. She needed allies, she needed authority, she needed to ensure Patricia could not twist the narrative as she had done so many times before. In the morning, she called Linda over, hands shaking, as she showed her the footage. Linda watched in grim silence, her lips pressed tight, then turned to Rachel with eyes burning. "This is evidence," she said firmly. "You must bring this to the police and to CPS. Do not wait another day." Rachel nodded but admitted her fear. What if Patricia convinced the police it was discipline, not abuse? What if CPS questioned Rachel's ability to provide a safe home? Linda clasped her hand and said she had seen enough cases to know that the system listened when there was clear video proof. Rachel's fear did not vanish, but it was steadied by her neighbor's certainty. That night, Rachel kissed Lily goodnight with tears in her eyes, whispering that soon everything would be different. As Lily drifted to sleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Rachel sat awake clutching the memory card from the camera, her weapon and her salvation. She no longer felt like a helpless daughter cowed by Patricia's control. She was a mother preparing to fight for her child's safety, and this time she had truth on her side. Rachel returned home early on a Thursday night, her heart pounding with both fear and fury. She had arranged with her supervisor to leave before her shift ended, unable to bear the thought of leaving Lily alone one more evening. As she parked the car in front of the house, she saw the upstairs light on in Lily's room. The image of her daughter's tear-stained face from the recordings haunted her, fueling the anger that now burned in her chest. She opened the door quietly, the house unusually still except for faint voices from upstairs. Moving with deliberate steps, Rachel crept down the hall and paused outside Lily's room. Through the thin door, she heard her daughter's small voice crying, "Stop, Grandma, please." That plea snapped something inside Rachel. She shoved open the door, and the sight before her froze her blood. Patricia stood looming over Lily, a wooden ruler clenched in her hand, her face twisted with rage. Lily cowered on the bed, arms raised to shield herself. Rachel's voice shook the walls as she shouted, "What are you doing?" Patricia turned startled, then quickly masked her expression with cold disdain. Disciplining her, she snapped, "You never could. Someone has to." Rachel moved forward, pulling Lily into her arms, shielding her daughter with her body. "You will never lay a hand on her again," she hissed, her whole body trembling. Patricia sneered, eyes flashing. "You are weak, Rachel, always have been. That child will grow up useless if she only listens to you." Rage surged through Rachel, but instead of screaming, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. With deliberate movements, she opened the video files and pressed play. The room filled with Patricia's own recorded voice, cold and venomous, belittling Lily, slapping her, commanding her to kneel. The color drained from Patricia's face. She took a step forward, hand outstretched, muttering, "Give me that phone!" Rachel backed away, holding it tight. "No. The world will hear what you've done!" Lily clung to her mother's waist, sobbing softly but with a hint of relief in her voice. Patricia's composure cracked her voice, rising into a shriek. "I did what had to be done. You are not fit to be a mother. You never were. That child belongs to me." Rachel stood taller, her fear replaced by resolve. "I may not be perfect, but I am her mother, and unlike you, I love her enough not to break her spirit." For a moment, the room was thick with silence, only Lily's sniffles filling the air. Patricia's face contorted with fury, and she lunged forward, but Rachel held her ground. "If you touch her again," Rachel said coldly, "I will make sure you never come near either of us." Patricia halted, breathing hard, the ruler slipping from her fingers to the floor. Rachel guided Lily toward the door, but before leaving she turned back. "You've controlled me my entire life. That ends tonight. You will never control her." They left the room together, Lily gripping her mother's hand as if it were a lifeline. Rachel locked her bedroom door behind them, sat Lily on the bed, and whispered soothing words, promising she was safe now. As Lily cried into her shoulder, Rachel knew there was no turning back. She had confronted the monster that had haunted her childhood and found the strength to protect her daughter. The proof was in her phone, undeniable and damning. Tomorrow she would take it to the authorities. For now, she kissed Lily's forehead and repeated over and over, "Mommy is here. Mommy will never let her hurt you again." The wooden ruler still lay on Lily's floor, silent evidence of a battle long overdue. The next morning, Rachel rose with swollen eyes from a night of restless vigilance. Lily had finally fallen asleep in her arms, but Rachel had stayed awake listening for any sign of Patricia moving down the hall. By dawn, she had made her decision with crystal clarity. She dressed quickly, packed Lily's school things, and slipped the phone containing the recordings into her purse. Patricia sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, her gaze sharp and unrepentant. Running away. "Rachel," she sneered. Rachel ignored the jab, guiding Lily toward the door without a word. "You will regret this," Patricia hissed, but Rachel did not turn back. Her daughter's small hand clutched hers tightly as they walked to the car, both knowing something irreversible had shifted. At the police station, Rachel requested to speak with Chief Daniels, a seasoned officer with years of community respect. With trembling hands, she showed him the videos. Daniels watched silently, his jaw tightening as the footage revealed Patricia's cruel words and Lily's terrified responses. "This is serious," he said firmly when the video ended. "We will open a case immediately." He called in a representative from Child Protective Services, a social worker named Ms. Harris, who listened carefully to Rachel's account while taking notes. "Your daughter's safety is our priority," Ms. Harris assured her. "From this moment, Patricia is to have no unsupervised contact with Lily." Relief mixed with fear in Rachel's chest. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she had taken the first step toward justice. That afternoon, CPS arranged for Lily to be interviewed by a child psychologist in a safe and supportive environment. At first, Lily was hesitant, her voice barely above a whisper, but with gentle encouragement, she admitted that her grandmother hurt her and told her not to tell anyone. She repeated the chilling phrases Patricia had used, saying that if she spoke up, her mother would disappear. The psychologist nodded gravely, explaining to Rachel afterward that Lily displayed clear signs of psychological and physical abuse. The report would support criminal charges. Patricia was summoned to the station for questioning later that week. She arrived wearing her usual air of superiority, insisting she had only disciplined her granddaughter in the way children needed. But when the recordings were played, she paled, fidgeted, and tried to explain them away as misunderstandings taken out of context. Daniels cut her off sharply. "These are not misunderstandings. This is abuse." Patricia's arrogance cracked, and she shouted that Rachel was weak, that without her intervention, Lily would grow up spoiled. The officers took note of her outburst, confirming the controlling mindset evident in the recordings. Rachel sat silently across the table, heart pounding, but for the first time, she felt like the powerless child inside her was gone. She had evidence, she had allies, and Patricia's mask was crumbling in the face of the law. A temporary restraining order was issued that same day, barring Patricia from coming near Rachel or Lily. The court set a hearing to determine long-term measures. Rachel walked out of the courthouse holding Lily's hand, both of them breathing a little easier. Yet Patricia did not accept defeat quietly. She called Rachel's phone repeatedly, leaving voicemails filled with venom claiming Rachel had betrayed her own mother and that she would regret turning the family against her. Rachel saved every message, forwarding them to the detective handling the case. "These threats only strengthen your case," he told her. Rachel felt both shaken and strangely vindicated. Each word from Patricia was further proof of the toxic control she had endured her whole life. Meanwhile, Lily began sessions with the psychologist arranged by CPS. The child slowly opened up, describing nights when Patricia would enter her room after Rachel left for work, commanding her to kneel and insisting her mother was weak. Sometimes Lily would cry herself to sleep, fearing Rachel would vanish as Patricia threatened. Hearing these stories broke Rachel's heart, yet it also fueled her determination to see the process through. She vowed that Lily would never again doubt her mother's presence or love. Weeks passed as the investigation solidified. Witness statements were collected, including Linda's testimony about hearing Lily's screams. When the preliminary hearing arrived, Patricia faced the judge with defiance. Rachel sat across the courtroom with Lily by her side and Linda in the audience for support. The judge listened to the evidence and played sections of the recordings aloud. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Patricia's words echoed against the walls. "Your mom is useless. If you tell her, she will disappear." Patricia's face twisted, realizing the community now saw her without disguise. The judge issued a ruling that Patricia be formally charged with child abuse and intimidation and granted CPS's request for supervised psychiatric evaluation. Rachel felt tears slip down her cheeks as the gavel struck. Justice was no longer just a hope. It was beginning to take form, and for the first time she saw a path forward where her daughter could live without fear. The day of the public confrontation arrived sooner than Rachel expected. Chief Daniels and Ms. Harris from CPS suggested that showing the evidence in front of neutral witnesses would both strengthen the case and prevent Patricia from later twisting the narrative. Rachel felt her stomach churn at the thought of her private pain being displayed to others, yet she agreed because she wanted no one in town to doubt what had been happening inside her home. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, Rachel opened her living room to a handful of trusted neighbors, including Linda, who had been the first to sound the alarm, and two other families who lived nearby. Daniels arrived in uniform with another officer, and Ms. Harris carried a folder of documents. Lily sat quietly beside her mother, holding Rachel's hand tightly, her eyes wide with both fear and hope. When Patricia walked through the door, escorted by an officer, her expression was the same haughty mask she had always worn, chin high and lips curled in disdain. She looked around at the assembled neighbors and scoffed. "So this is the circus my daughter has created!" Rachel's pulse hammered in her ears, but she stayed seated, squeezing Lily's hand for strength. Daniels turned on the television and inserted the memory card. The room filled with Patricia's voice from the recordings, harsh and venomous. "Your mother is useless. Kneel down. If you tell her, she will disappear." The neighbors gasped, one woman covering her mouth in horror. The screen showed Patricia striking the desk, then slapping Lily, while the child flinched and begged to stop. Rachel felt tears streaming down her face, but she forced herself to keep her eyes on the screen so no one could ever claim she had exaggerated. When the video ended, the room was heavy with silence until Linda stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "I heard those cries. I knew something was wrong. This child has been suffering while we thought she was safe." Patricia leapt from her chair, face flushed red, shouting, "Lies! All of it! I was disciplining her. Every child needs discipline. Rachel is too weak to handle her own daughter." The neighbors murmured in disgust. One man shook his head and said loudly, "That is not discipline. That is abuse." Patricia's composure cracked completely. She pointed at Rachel, screaming, "She stole my granddaughter from me. That child belongs to me. Without me, she will be nothing." Daniels stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Enough. You are under investigation, and these outbursts only confirm what we have seen." As Patricia tried to push past, the officer restrained her and snapped handcuffs around her wrists. The sight of the woman who had terrorized both Rachel and Lily being restrained in front of the entire neighborhood was both surreal and liberating. Patricia struggled and wailed, "Rachel, you will regret this. You are destroying your own family." Rachel rose slowly, her arm around Lily, and for the first time in her life, she looked her mother in the eye without fear. "No," she said steadily. "I am saving my family." Neighbors nodded in support, some muttering words of encouragement. Linda walked over and placed a comforting hand on Rachel's shoulder. Lily buried her face against her mother's side, trembling, but when the officers led Patricia out of the house and into the waiting squad car, the little girl whispered softly, "She cannot hurt me now." Rachel kissed the top of her daughter's head, overwhelmed by relief. The neighbors who had watched were shaken, but they rallied around Rachel, promising to help however they could. Daniels reassured her that the evidence combined with the testimonies and Patricia's public breakdown would ensure the court recognized the severity of the abuse. As the police car pulled away down the quiet street, Rachel felt as though a weight had finally been lifted from her chest. For years, Patricia's voice had defined her sense of worth, and now for the first time it was the community's voices that drowned out that tyranny. What had once been a private cycle of pain was now undeniably exposed, and Rachel realized that the power Patricia had held over her had been broken in the most public way possible. In the days following Patricia's public arrest, Rachel felt both drained and strangely light, as if she had finally exhaled after holding her breath for years. The court quickly confirmed the charges of child abuse and intimidation, issuing a permanent restraining order that barred Patricia from coming near Rachel or Lily ever again. For Rachel, the official documents felt like more than legal paperwork. They were a shield that finally separated her daughter from generations of fear. Lily began therapy twice a week with a child psychologist recommended by CPS, and although at first she barely spoke above a whisper within a few sessions, she started drawing pictures of herself smiling with her mother, a sign that the shadows were beginning to lift. Rachel sat in on those sessions when permitted, her heart swelling when Lily admitted she no longer woke up scared every night. The bruises healed quickly, but the deeper wounds of mistrust took more time. Still, progress was visible in small moments, Lily humming while doing homework, Lily asking if her mother would read to her before bed, Lily laughing softly when Rachel burned pancakes on a Saturday morning. At work, Rachel requested a change of schedule, moving to daytime hours so she could be home with her daughter each night. Her supervisor, aware of what she had endured, approved the request without hesitation. With that shift, Rachel no longer faced the guilt of leaving Lily in the evenings. The relief of being present at bedtime, of knowing she was the one tucking her daughter in, became the greatest reward. The community support also helped more than Rachel ever expected. Neighbors brought meals, offered rides, and reassured Lily whenever they saw her outside playing. Linda visited, often always greeted with hugs from Lily, who now considered her a guardian angel. Rachel sometimes cried quietly in gratitude, realizing that for the first time she was not alone in her fight. Patricia, meanwhile, faced mandatory psychological evaluation and the prospect of long-term therapy under court supervision. Though the judge stopped short of sentencing her to prison due to her age and lack of prior convictions, the restrictions placed on her ensured she could never again claim power over Rachel's family. For Rachel, it was enough. She did not crave revenge through punishment. She wanted distant safety and freedom for her daughter. Standing in the backyard one evening while Lily ran with a neighborhood friend, Rachel let the autumn breeze wash over her face and felt the first genuine peace she had known in years. She still carried guilt that she had not acted sooner, but she also carried pride that she had finally broken the cycle. Lily was healing, the community knew the truth, and Patricia's reign of fear had ended. Rachel whispered a silent promise to herself that her daughter would grow up loved, not controlled, and that no voice would ever again convince Lily she was weak or unwanted. The consequences had been real and lasting, but so was the hope that now bloomed in their lives. Autumn deepened into winter, and with each passing week, Rachel saw pieces of her daughter return that she had feared were lost forever. One chilly evening, she and Lily curled up together under a quilt in the living room, the fire flickering as Rachel read aloud from Lily's favorite storybook. The little girl leaned against her eyes, bright with attention, and when the chapter ended, she whispered, "Mommy, thank you for protecting me now." Rachel's throat tightened with emotion as she kissed the top of her daughter's head and answered softly, "I will always be here. No one will ever hurt you again." Lily smiled the kind of genuine smile Rachel had missed for so long and snuggled closer. Later that night, Rachel tucked her into bed, smoothing her hair, as Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit. Through the window, the soft glow of Linda's porch light shone across the street, a steady beacon of safety. Rachel stood for a moment watching that light, realizing how much one courageous neighbor's voice had changed the course of their lives. Lily drifted into sleep with a contented sigh, and Rachel lingered absorbing the peace in the room. For the first time in months, there was no fear that Patricia might intrude, no dread of hidden cruelty waiting in the shadows. There was only the quiet rhythm of her daughter's breathing and the knowledge that they were safe. As spring approached, Lily began to thrive at school again. Her teacher reported she was participating in class, laughing with friends, and even volunteering to read aloud. At home, she filled sketchbooks with drawings of horses' trees and smiling faces. Rachel kept each page, treasuring them as proof of resilience. In her own heart, Rachel felt a transformation as well. She no longer saw herself as the frightened daughter who bent under her mother's control. She was the protector, the provider, the mother who had faced her greatest fear and refused to let history repeat itself. One evening while they shared cocoa on the porch, Lily asked why her grandmother had been so mean. Rachel hesitated, then answered gently, "Sometimes people are sick in ways we cannot see. They hurt others because they never healed inside themselves. But you and I, we are free of that now. We get to choose love instead." Lily nodded satisfied and leaned against her mother with quiet trust. Rachel closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the moment sink in. The darkness that once filled their home had been replaced with light, not only from the lamps, but from the laughter returning to their lives. As she watched her daughter sleep peacefully later that night, Rachel whispered a final vow. "You will grow up knowing you are enough. You will grow up loved." Outside, the neighborhood lay calm under the stars, the porch light across the street still shining, and Rachel understood that family was not defined by blood alone. True family was built from love, trust, and the willingness to protect each other no matter the cost.